all good. Okay, so with farmer problems, just remember during the Gilded Age, there's some problems. Okay, and like I said, we're not at our notes yet, but just like pay attention. So don't worry about any blanks or anything like that. Just remember, you had the grains. Remember that? Okay. Now, 1873 and 1893, both are panics. Both are have to do with overspeculation for railroads. Remember that? Okay. And what the railroads are going to do is they're going to try to increase their rates on farmers. Why? Because they know the farmers are dependent on them for shipping. Okay. Also, I want to point out there is railroads have warehouses where they will store farmers' excess grains. Now, not crops that are going to rot, you know what I'm saying? But you know, like grains, like they need a place to store them, okay? So railroads also will really increase their rental rates, I guess you could say, their storage rates, okay? But just remember, too, that when we talk about the grains, this was like a fellowship, like socially, remember that? Okay, fellowship, some social stuff, learning about different techniques of like growing and stuff, and then they realized that they have this complaint. And what is the Grange's number one complaint? The railroads. Okay, so then they'll go to like their state, the different states out west, and the states will pass what we call Granger laws. That's a nickname. And these are laws that will try to regulate the railroad rates. Okay? And in the court case, Munn versus Illinois, said that the Granger laws were constitutional. Okay? But a little less than like 10 years later, you'll have some new people on the Supreme Court, and they will say, nope, not constitutional. Okay, and that's Wabash versus Illinois. Remember, the Grange is also called patrons of husbandry. Sometimes we call like the Grange as a co-op or cooperative, just things like fellowship, working together. There is something that represents the Grange, like, you know, it says we feed all, just talking about the importance of, you know, the Grange and farmers. So you have Munn versus Illinois. Remember, that's where it says the Granger laws are constitutional. Okay, but then in 1886, you have Wabash versus Illinois that said these laws are not constitutional. Okay, and because remember, when it involves more states, like more than one state, who has the authority to regulate interstate commerce? It involves more than one state. Who can determine the railroad rates? The federal government, Congress. Okay, now we're going to take it back to the first 9 weeks. What was that court case from Chapter 9 that said when we're talking about interstate commerce, more than one state, Congress has the authority? Gibbons versus Ogden. Good. Okay, so Wabash versus Illinois said, nope, only Congress has that authority. And speaking of Congress with their authority, they're going to establish the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, which would oversee reasonable railroad rates. However, it wasn't that effective. Very just kind of fluff, you know what I'm saying? Almost insulting, because it's like, here's the commission. They didn't really do much. Okay? So then what's going to happen, okay, after this like little wave, okay, there'll be a group of what we call farmers' alliances, okay? You'll have like Northern Farmers Alliances, Southern Farmers Alliances, you'll have Colored Farmers Alliances, you also have Women's Farmers Alliances, okay? And they're the ones who are they keep on pushing, like for more regulation, helping out the farmers. Does that make sense? Okay. So just remember in the 1870s, you know, talking about all the stuff that we are producing, farmers will make 38% of what we are producing, okay? But then 1890s, 24%. So they are not, everything declining, okay? Just remember, when we have panics, what tends to happen is wages across the board are cut. Also, prices go down during panics. So farmers, are they able to really sell and make a profit? Not nearly as much during these panics, okay? So just remember, you have the Grange, and they're somewhat successful, but then eventually not as successful. There is the ICC that's kind of weak. And then you have a new wave of these farmers alliances, which are just like regional things, okay? Remember the Greenback Party? What did the Greenback Party want? What was their number one issue? They wanted what type of money? Paper money, okay? We know that eventually paper money, like, it's just isn't going to be an option. Who was the Greenback Party's candidate? James Weaver, okay? But then after the Greenback Party dies out, there's paying all this stuff. Now people are going to focus instead of paper money on what? You can't have paper, so what can you have? So you want silver. Does that make sense? The farmers are going to want silver, okay? And so what's going to happen is there will eventually be a new political party that will be formed in 1892 called the Populist Party, also known as the People's Party, okay? And one big part of their platform is the free and unlimited coinage of silver. Guess who will be the Populist Party's first presidential candidate? James B. Weaver. So doesn't that show you how, like, Greenback Party, lots of farmers, the same guy's running for the Populist Party, okay? So now I'm going to show you a little video. The video in its entirety is about 10 minutes. Okay, so this is something. Now, about halfway through, I have a Google Classroom question. Check for understanding. Okay? So I'm going to mute. And the first section is about like a problem.
Problematic as they were, the railroads were proving to be the engines of industrialization on the American plains. By 1890, there were more than 70,000 miles of track in operation west of the Mississippi, where the population had nearly quadrupled in just 30 years. American farmers were shipping wheat, corn, oats, and rye across the world, feeding the growing cities on the eastern seaboard and the capitals of Europe. But the men and women producing this bounty weren't seeing many of the benefits. Farmers in Kansas, for instance, were working 15 or 16-hour days and losing ground. Prices for their crops had been declining for a decade. Most farmers had taken loans to make up shortfalls, and their mortgages were likely to be held by bankers back east. And there were few laws to stop the most predatory lenders from charging 20, 30, or even 50% interest per year. The cost of transporting crops to market, meanwhile, remained an onerous burden.
The only way to get their goods to market is on the railroads, and they've kept rates high. These are not the small family yeoman farmers that Thomas Jefferson envisioned as the heart of America. These are farmers who are in debt to the banks, and who now have to pay a huge chunk of their income to the railroads.
There are memories that people still have of what it was like before industrial capitalism. That, of course, is rooted in the agrarian past, the small proprietor past. It is also redolent of a more egalitarian vision of society than the one that's emerging.
There was a feeling that control had shifted from Kansas to the East Coast. They looked at their own lives and they say, 50 years ago, when my grandfather was young, he controlled his own life. This idea that people ought to be in control of their destiny is something that's very powerful.
Frustration in Kansas had sharpened into resentment and scorn. Among the loudest voices of protest on the hot, dry prairie was a 39-year-old former school teacher and licensed attorney named Mary Elizabeth Lease. She was an energetic agitator who made a living giving speeches in support of underdogs. Labor unionists, suffragettes, and in the summer of 1890, the Kansas farmer. She flashed across Kansas in that day of turmoil, one well-known editor remarked. A harridan in the eyes of her enemies, a goddess to her friends. I think she was a little of both.
She's apparently just a riveting orator. She has a tremendous voice. She can speak to crowds of thousands. And she also has a tremendous memory. She can speak for a couple of hours without reviewing any notes. And clearly, she strikes a chord.
Mary Lease could empathize with the thousands of Kansans whose daily lives balanced on a razor's edge between plenty and want. She was one of them. Lease was the sixth child of immigrants who had fled the Great Famine in Ireland. Her father and one brother died fighting for the Union in the Civil War. Another brother was killed when a train crushed him while working as a laborer for a railroad corporation. In the early 1870s, when Lease was still in her 20s, a nationwide economic depression swept away her husband's pharmacy business and all of their savings.
They lose everything. She's very embittered by poverty and frustrated, and comes to feel that, that the social order just isn't fair.
Women could not run for state office in Kansas in 1890, but Lease helped to spur the founding of a new local political organization, the People's Party, widely known as the Populists.
The populists believe that they're being ripped off, that industrial capitalism discriminates against them, and they're right. The populists organize politically to do something about that. They leave both parties to form their own because they feel both parties are corrupted beyond hope, that they're too much under the thumb of big business. They buy senators, they buy congressmen, their lobbyists infest the Capitol.
The People's Party put up a full slate of candidates for the election that year and announced its intent to wrest state government from the grasp of big business.
Mary Lease says this kind of system is fatal and destroying the lives of millions of people, and that if we don't do something drastic about this, we not only will lose our way of life, but American democracy will go down, down with that way of life.
She said, when someone has 5 homes and someone else is starving, then the first man has something that belongs to the second man. People shouldn't be starving while other people have so much more than they can possibly ever use or spend.
Lease had scoundrels to blame, and she called them out. She was particularly focused on bankers in New York, like the one at 23 Wall Street who seemed to have his fingers in everything, J.P. Morgan. It is no longer a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, Lease told her crowds, but a government of Wall Street, by Wall Street, and for Wall Street.
Wall Street is the arch villain. It doesn't produce anything. It just trades in paper, controls everybody else's life without offering anything tangible to the national welfare. That's how they see it.
Republican officials, whose party had dominated state politics for nearly 30 years, weren't much concerned with Lease and her followers in the early weeks of the campaign. But they were startled by the procession of 1,000 horse-drawn carriages bound for one of the People's Party events, by the crowds of 10,000 at a rally in Lawrence, and 20,000 in Emporia, and by reports that the upstart party had enrolled 130,000 members in the state. Election day news out of Kansas shocked the country. The Democrats won only 8 seats in the state legislature. The Republicans, long in the majority, won 26. The People's Party won 91 seats and control of the Kansas state legislature. This triumph declared one populist newspaper, is but the beginning. Success in Kansas sparked a brush fire that swept through much of the nation in the next 2 years. Newly encouraged farmers joined acolytes of Henry George, labor unionists, and miners from the West. Black professionals and farmers in the South were also drawn to the People's Party. Republicans had abandoned them in the years after the Civil War, and Democrats were working to strip them of the right to vote. The populists were the last best hope.
There is a surprising number of black farmers who have managed to buy land, despite the fact that most white landowners in the South are pretty reluctant to sell land to blacks. But the vast majority of black farmers are tenant farmers or they're sharecroppers. The economy's in very bad shape, and the populists have a program to really transform the economy in ways that'll be good for working people.
The People's Party built a platform of radical and untested ideas. Public ownership of railroads and utilities, a federal income tax, a Treasury Department empowered to write loans and to control the money supply.
The populists were incredibly modern, incredibly forward-looking. They are thinking in very constructive, practical ways about how American political institutions and the role of government could reorganize.
What's important to remember about this period is the sense of hope. Change was possible. Change was imminent. Democracy would triumph.
While the populists were organizing for future elections, there was another kind of fight bubbling at Andrew Carnegie's steel mill in Homestead, Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh. Homestead had become the jewel in the...
So I have one more question to pose. And if you did not answer the first one, you can do that. Here's the second question. Okay? I am posting it right now. And then there is I call it individual populism work. I'm assigning it, but I'm giving you 20 minutes to work on it. Do I expect you to be finished with it? No. Okay? I'll be checking on Go Guardian where I can see if you're working or not. Okay? So I'm going to set a timer for 22 minutes so that should give you time to finish up that those video questions that I posted and work on that for the individual thing for 20 minutes. Okay? For sure. I think first block that started a little bit late, so if you did finish it, go ahead and turn it in so you can knock it out. But you don't have to finish it right now, but if you did finish it, go ahead and turn it in so you don't forget. Okay, people who are online, can y'all hear me? Okay, awesome. So now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on populism, okay? And for time's sake, I might tell you the notes in just a little bit, like the blanks, just let me talk for a second and then we'll just fill in, okay? So what is populism, okay? Think about populism in general, not the populist party, but it's like the idea that the majority of the people are not the rich people. They're not your 1%ers of what we say today, okay? And it's the idea that the majority of the people in society are common people. They are not this cream of the crop wealthy. They are more common. And so politics and government needs to cater to the majority of the people and not the elite, okay? Again, it's the idea of populism, the power to the people, Okay? And again, it's usually about the government needs to cater to the majority of the people, which are your, in this case, in the Populist Party, your farmers, your everyday movement. We tend to talk about this as a grassroots movement, okay, where it's like starts more local and then gets like national attention. But grassroots means it starts local, okay? Populism, think the people. So, July 4th, October 1892, I remember we talked about Grange and Farmers Alliances. Okay, a group of farmers in the Farmers Alliance in Omaha, Nebraska, okay, created the Populist Party. They outlined their issues, which you know, a party's issues becomes known as its platform, okay? And it's called the Omaha Platform that established the Populist Party, also known as the People's Party. Okay, and again, farmers and their problems stem from the Grange. The Grange is the background information for the Populist Party. Now, these issues, okay, it's a lot of different things. One is coinage of silver. Okay, next is a graduated income tax, which y'all know the more you make, the more you pay. Farmers who are poor should not have to pay the same as someone like J.P. Morgan's company. Does that make sense? Direct election of senators. Prior to the 17th Amendment, which will happen later, the two senators from each state were handpicked by the state legislatures. Do you see that corruption, the puppet master? The only way to be a U.S. senator is for a state legislature to handpick you. What the Populist Party wants is for the people to elect senators. Okay? Initiative, referendum, recall. These are examples of everyday people who are American citizens who are registered to vote, so that would be me, okay, who could be part of the lawmaking process. Okay, so for instance, Sunday alcohol sales, selling fireworks in Georgia. Those were all established in the last 10 years through an initiative. Think an initiative as a petition where you go around and you get signatures. Now, y'all signatures would not count. Why? Because you're not registered voters. Okay, but once you have a certain percentage of registered voters sign your petition, the initiative, the next step is a referendum where it's actually a public vote. So like fireworks sales in Georgia, Sunday alcohol sales, it was an initiative, and then the vote based off the initiative is called the referendum. So do you see how that's more democracy to the people and not just the lawmakers? Okay, the secret ballot. Federal loans with hardly any interest rates to farmers, okay? This one I think is really bold, but remember, they do not like the railroads and the telegraphs and the telephones, okay, discriminatory rates. So what does the Populist Party want to do? They want the government to nationalize all of these companies, meaning take it over, government owned. That's a little radical, but do you see there's lots of different things, okay? Civil service reform. They don't want like immigrants to be able to own land. They want to, restrict immigration. Okay, they want to get rid of scabs, and they want an 8-hour workday. Okay, you see how this is almost like a quilt. Okay, hence why this cover is called the People's Party, a party of patches, because it's like so many different things that like how can you really be effective? That's what like this is a negative perspective of the People's Party or Populist Party. Okay, so just want to point out there's a guy named Tom Watson. That's that blank. He was a leader of the Southern Alliance. This is before we get to the Populist Party. Okay, Mary Lease would be part of the National Women's Alliance. Okay, so the Populist Party. What I would do somewhere near where it says Populist Party, write Omaha Convention or Omaha Platform. They want a tariff reduction, graduated income tax, direct election of senators. They want the government to provide warehouses where they store their crops. Okay. They want free and unlimited coinage of silver. Government what of railroads, telegraphs, and telephone companies? Ownership. And what did I tell you? Instead of calling it petition, what do we call it when it comes to the lawmaking process? Initiative. And they kind of will support the Knights of Labor, even though the Populist Party, you tend to think farmers, because the Knights of Labor really wanted an 8-hour workday. So they will be big on that too. So if you're your JP Morgan or Rockefeller, you would not like the Populist Party. Yes.
What's the tariff blanket?
Reduction.
The one right below it.
Graduated income tax.
What's the coinage?
Silver.
And the one.
Ownership. Okay. So again, the Populist Party. Let's see. So now, just want to point out, okay, this is a really successful third party in the context of there's only so much a third party can do, right? Where America is basically a two-party system, but the Populist Party, they gave us a run for their money. Okay. For instance, in the election of 1892, James B. Weaver, the Populist Party candidate, he will receive 1 million
May I have your
votes.
attention for a special announcement? Staff and students, please note, I sent a message out to you regarding lunches today and tomorrow. We will continue with the normal lunch schedule
Unless you're
for
testing.
all students who are not testing. For those students who are testing in EOCs this afternoon, they should eat first lunch and then report to the testing station. So regular lunch for all students except those who are testing. Have a great day, Newman.
Okay. And then, but here's where, this is what's pretty, because y'all know, just like today with this election, y'all seen it like the Senate race for Georgia. I mean, that is super important. Okay. Think of it like in this context. Okay. In 1892, 10 House Representative spots, Populist won. 5 senator spots, Populist won. 3 governors, Populist. That's a pretty strong third party, if you ask me. One, if not the most successful third party. Okay. So I wanted to go over this very quickly. So L. Frank Baum wrote The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and there's a lot of allegory, imagery, symbolism behind it. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so Scarecrow represents the farmers, and they're out of ideas, hence no brain. But if you notice, the Scarecrow tended to develop good ideas. Okay, Kansas is the agricultural West. Think like Omaha, Nebraska, Kansas. The Twister represents the populist momentum, that movement of getting national attention. Dorothy represents the American people. Very naive, needs guidance. Okay. And I'm going to skip some. Okay, so the Wicked Witch of the West represents your railroad companies, your oil company. Okay. The Tin Man, I think this one, okay, represents industrial workers during the Gilded Age. They're dehumanized by labor, hence no heart. The machinery, the unskilled, doing the same thing for hours a day. Okay. Now, there's a couple things. The Wizard of Oz. We'll spell Oz. O-Z.
What?
O-Z. What does that represent? Yeah, ounce. Oz, ounce. And then Hollywood made her ruby slippers red, but what color were her shoes really? Silver. You see, like lots of different things now. Okay? All right. Have a good rest of your day. Yes.